The mansion stood like a fortress of glass and marble in the heart of Beverly Hills, its pristine white walls reflecting the unforgiving California sun. Inside, silence had replaced the laughter that once echoed through its corridors. Dr. Marcus Whitfield closed his medical bag with a heavy sigh, his expensive suit somehow feeling tighter than when he'd arrived 3 hours earlier. "Mr. Al-Rashid," he began, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. "I've reviewed every test result twice. The toxicology screens, the blood panels, the neurological assessments. Everything comes back inconclusive. I'm sorry, but I don't have answers." Khalid al-Rashid stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, his tailored suit immaculate despite the chaos consuming his life. At 42, he was a man accustomed to solving problems with a phone call and a wire transfer. Oil, real estate, technology. He'd built an empire by seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. But now, staring at the perfectly manicured gardens below, he felt powerless for the first time in his adult life. "That's the 7th specialist this month," Khalid said, his accent thick with exhaustion. 7 doctors. The best in the country, they told me. Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. And not one of you can tell me why my children are dying. Dr. Whitfield shifted uncomfortably. "The symptoms are unusual. The fever that comes and goes without pattern. The muscle weakness, the cognitive decline. It's unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of practice. If I may suggest, perhaps a facility specializing in rare diseases. I've had them at Cedars-Sinai for 2 weeks." Khalid interrupted, his voice sharp. "They ran every test known to medicine. The conclusion? Unexplained illness of unknown origin. Do you know what that means, doctor? It means they took my money and gave me nothing." Upstairs, in adjacent bedrooms designed like something from a fairy tale, 8-year-old twins Layla and Kareem lay motionless in their beds. The rooms were filled with medical equipment that beeped and hummed. IV stands, heart monitors, oxygen tanks, transforming what should have been spaces of childhood joy into sterile hospital wards. Layla's room, once decorated in lavender and silver with walls covered in her own paintings, now smelled of antiseptic and medication. Kareem's space, filled with model airplanes and astronomy posters, felt equally foreign. The children's mother, Yasmin, sat in the hallway between their rooms, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. She'd lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks, her once vibrant presence reduced to a ghost haunting her own home. Her eyes, rimmed with dark circles, stared at nothing in particular. "Mrs. Al-Rashid?" A soft voice broke through her thoughts. Yasmin looked up to see Naomi standing there, holding a tray with untouched tea from hours earlier. The new maid had started just 2 weeks ago, hired through an agency after their previous household staff had quit, overwhelmed by the medical emergency that had consumed the mansion. Naomi Washington was 46 years old, with kind eyes that seemed to absorb the world's pain without judgment. Her dark skin bore the story of a hard life. Thin scars on her hands from years of domestic work, worry lines etched around her eyes. She wore the standard black and white uniform of the household staff, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Unlike the other employees who hurried through their duties with eyes averted, Naomi moved with quiet purpose, as if she belonged to a different rhythm than the chaos surrounding her. "You should eat something," Naomi said gently, her voice carrying the soft drawl of her native Georgia. "Can't pour from an empty cup, ma'am." Yasmin shook her head. "How can I eat when my babies are?" Her voice broke. Naomi set the tray down and, in a gesture that would have seemed presumptuous from anyone else, sat beside her employer. "I know you don't know me well, Mrs. Al-Rashid, but I've seen hard times, and I've learned that keeping your strength isn't selfish. It's necessary." Before Yasmin could respond, a monitor alarm shrieked from Layla's room. Both women rushed inside to find the little girl thrashing weakly, her face contorted in pain. Nurse Chen, the private duty nurse who'd been with the family for the past week, was already adjusting the IV drip. "Another episode," Nurse Chen said crisply, injecting something into the IV line. "This is the 3rd one today. The pain medication isn't holding as long as it should. If you're finding this story as gripping as we are, please hit that subscribe button. We're just starting out, and every subscription helps us bring you more incredible true stories like this one. Your support means everything." Naomi stood in the corner, watching intently as the nurse worked. She observed how Layla's fingers twitched in a specific pattern, how the child's eyes rolled back at precise intervals, how a faint rash appeared on her neck during the episode before fading minutes later. Details no one else seemed to notice or record. Downstairs, Khalid was dismissing Dr. Whitfield when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his business partner in Riyadh. He let it go to voicemail. Another call came immediately after, then another. His empire was crumbling while he stood helpless in his own home. "Baba?" A weak voice called from upstairs. Khalid took the stairs two at a time, bursting into Kareem's room. His son's eyes were open, the first time in 2 days. Hope and fear warred in Khalid's chest. "I'm here, Habibi, I'm here." He knelt beside the bed, taking his son's small hand. Kareem's skin felt like paper, fragile and dry. "Where's Layla?" Kareem whispered. "I can't hear her thoughts anymore." It was the fever talking, Khalid told himself. The twins had always had an uncanny connection, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate without words. But lately, Kareem had been saying strange things, talking about colors no one else could see, hearing sounds from impossible distances. "Your sister is resting just like you should be," Khalid said, his voice cracking despite his efforts to sound strong. Naomi appeared in the doorway with fresh water. She'd learned the family's routines quickly, anticipating needs before they were spoken. She set the pitcher down quietly and turned to leave, but Kareem's voice stopped her. "You're new," the boy said, his eyes focusing on her with unusual intensity. "You smell like my grandmother's kitchen in Riyadh." "How?" Naomi smiled sadly. "Just the soap I use, sweetheart. Now you rest." But as she left the room, her expression shifted. Her eyes weren't on the hallway ahead, but on something she'd noticed. The faint purple tinge under Kareem's fingernails, the way his pupils dilated when certain lights hit them, the subtle tremor in his left hand that the others attributed to weakness, but seemed too regular, too patterned. That evening, the household staff gathered in the kitchen for their late dinner. There were only 4 of them now: Naomi, the cook Maria, the gardener Thomas, and the night security guard Robert. The others had found reasons to leave, unable to handle the oppressive atmosphere of impending tragedy. "Those poor babies," Maria said, crossing herself. "My own children, I can't imagine. Mr. Al-Rashid, he tries to be strong, but you can see he's breaking." 7 doctors, Thomas muttered, shaking his head. "What kind of sickness baffles 7 specialists? It's not natural." "Don't start with that supernatural nonsense," Robert warned. "It's a medical mystery, that's all. Science hasn't solved everything yet." Naomi ate her meal in silence, but her mind was far from quiet. She thought about the children's symptoms, the pattern of their decline, the timing of their episodes. She thought about the mansion itself, its perfect temperature control, its filtered air, its purified water. She thought about the new artwork in the children's wing, the recent renovation of their bathroom, the custom-made furniture that had arrived just before they fell ill. After dinner, while the others retired to their quarters, Naomi made her way through the mansion under the pretense of collecting the dinner trays from upstairs. The house was a maze of marble and wealth, but she'd memorized its layout with the precision of someone who'd learned to be invisible while seeing everything. She passed Yasmin's bedroom and heard the muffled sound of crying. She paused, her hand hovering near the door, then continued. Some pain was too private for comfort, even kindly meant. In Layla's room, Nurse Chen had dozed off in her chair, exhausted from days of constant vigilance. The little girl slept fitfully, her breathing shallow but steady. Naomi stood in the doorway, studying the room with fresh eyes. The walls were painted a custom shade of lavender. Yasmin had mentioned it was mixed specially to match Layla's favorite dress. The furniture was made from imported wood, sanded and sealed with what they'd assured her were child-safe products. The curtains were new, heavy silk that blocked out every bit of light. Naomi's eyes stopped on the nightstand. Among the medications and medical supplies sat a silver music box, its surface tarnished despite the room's meticulous cleaning. She'd noticed Layla holding it during her brief moments of consciousness, her small fingers tracing its engravings with something like desperation. Moving silently, Naomi crossed to Kareem's room. The boy slept deeply, his face peaceful in a way it rarely was during waking hours. Here, too, everything was new and expensive and carefully chosen. Everything except an old compass on his nightstand, its brass case worn smooth by countless small hands. As Naomi turned to leave, her foot caught on something. She looked down to see a heating vent, its cover slightly askew. She knelt, straightening it, and felt warm air rushing up. But there was something else, a faint smell, chemical and sharp, barely noticeable beneath the medical odors that permeated the rooms. Her heart began to beat faster. She pressed her face closer to the vent, breathing carefully. The smell was stronger there, metallic and wrong. She'd encountered something similar once, years ago, in a house she'd cleaned where the family's elderly father had gotten sick from. "Can I help you with something?" Naomi jerked upright to find Khalid standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She realized how it must look, the new maid, practically lying on the floor by his sick son's bed in the middle of the night. "I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Rashid," she said quickly, standing and smoothing her uniform. "The vent cover was loose, I was just fixing it." Khalid studied her for a long moment. In the dim light, he looked 10 years older than his age, the weight of his children's illness visible in every line of his face. "You didn't need to do that. We have maintenance staff." "Yes, sir. I couldn't leave it." She moved toward the door, but something made her pause. "Mr. Al-Rashid, if I may ask, when did the children first get sick? What was the very first symptom?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why do you want to know?" "Just curious, sir. I've been praying for them." Khalid's shoulders sagged slightly. Maybe it was the late hour, or the exhaustion, or the simple human need to talk about the nightmare that had consumed his life. "It was 6 weeks ago. Layla complained of a headache. Just a normal headache, we thought. But it didn't go away. Then Kareem started having dizzy spells. Within days, they both collapsed. And since then," he gestured helplessly at the medical equipment surrounding his son. "And the doctors, they've tested for everything?" "Everything," Khalid confirmed bitterly. "Infections, genetic disorders, environmental factors, psychological causes. Nothing. They're dying and no one can tell me why." Naomi nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Have they tested the house itself? The air quality, the water?" "Of course, all within normal ranges." Khalid's tone sharpened with suspicion. "You're not a doctor. Why all these questions?" "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to overstep. I'll go now." But as she left, Naomi's thoughts were crystallizing into a terrible suspicion. She'd seen something like this before, in a different context, in a different life. And if she was right, then the answer wasn't in the children's blood or genes or psychology. It was in something much simpler, much more insidious, and much easier to overlook. The question was, could she prove it? And even if she could, would anyone listen to a maid who'd been there less than 2 weeks? As she descended the stairs back to her small room in the staff quarters, Naomi made a decision. She would break every rule she'd been taught about staying invisible, staying quiet, staying in her place. Because 2 children were dying, and she might be the only person who could see why. Tomorrow she would do the unthinkable. Dawn broke over Beverly Hills with the kind of perfect light that photographers paid fortunes to capture. But inside the Al-Rashid mansion, morning brought only another day of dread. Naomi had barely slept, her mind turning over possibilities, connecting dots that everyone else had missed or dismissed. She rose at 5:30, as was her habit, and prepared for her day with unusual purpose. Today, she wouldn't just clean and serve. Today, she would investigate. The risk was enormous. She could be fired, accused of overstepping, or worse. But the image of those 2 children, their lives ebbing away while adults stood helpless, had settled into her chest like a stone. In the kitchen, Maria was already preparing breakfast. The cook looked exhausted, her normally cheerful demeanor replaced by a grim determination to maintain normalcy in an increasingly abnormal situation. "You're up early," Maria commented, whisking eggs with mechanical precision. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Something like that," Naomi replied, pouring herself coffee. "Maria, can I ask you something? When did they renovate the children's wing?" Maria's hands paused mid-whisk. "Why do you want to know?" "Just curious, trying to understand the timeline." The cook resumed her work, but her expression had shifted. "It was about 2 months ago. Mrs. Al-Rashid wanted everything perfect for their birthday party. New paint, new furniture, new everything. Cost more than most people make in a lifetime." She shook her head. "And now look, all that money, and it couldn't buy health. Who did the work? Some fancy company from downtown. Elite Renovations or something like that. They were here for 3 weeks making noise all hours. Mr. Al-Rashid wasn't happy about the disruption, but Mrs. Al-Rashid insisted." Maria lowered her voice. "Between you and me, I think she was trying to make up for something. She'd been traveling a lot for her charity work, felt guilty about being away from the children." Naomi absorbed this information, her suspicions growing stronger. "And the children got sick right after the renovation was finished?" "Maybe a week or 2 after," Maria said, then stopped, her eyes widening with understanding. "Wait, you don't think—" "I don't think anything yet," Naomi said quickly, just trying to piece things together. But Maria had already connected the dots. The paint, the materials. "You think something in the renovation made them sick?" "Keep your voice down," Naomi warned, glancing toward the doorway. I don't know anything for certain, and even if I'm right, I'm nobody. I'm a maid who's been here 2 weeks. Who's going to listen to me? You need to tell Mr. Al-Rashid. Tell him what, that I have a hunch? That I smelled something funny near a heating vent? Naomi shook her head. He's already dealt with 7 doctors. Why would he listen to me? Before Maria could respond, Nurse Chen appeared in the doorway, her face pale. I need water. Lots of it. Layla's fever spiked to 104. She's delirious. Both women sprang into action. Naomi grabbed a pitcher of ice water while Maria pulled clean towels from the drawer. They followed the nurse upstairs where chaos had erupted. Yasmin was sobbing at her daughter's bedside while Khalid was on the phone with yet another doctor, his voice sharp with desperation. Layla thrashed in her bed, her small body soaked with sweat. Her eyes were open but unseeing, her lips moving in a constant stream of incoherent words. Nurse Chen worked efficiently, applying cool compresses and adjusting medications, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her professional calm. The fever isn't responding to acetaminophen, she reported. We need to get her to the hospital. Now. No, Khalid said firmly, ending his call. No more hospitals. They had her for 2 weeks and accomplished nothing. She's staying here where we can watch her. Mr. Al-Rashid, with respect, a fever this high can cause brain damage. She needs emergency care. And what will they do that we can't do here? Khalid's voice cracked. Run more tests that show nothing? Pump her full of antibiotics that don't work? Watch her deteriorate in a sterile room instead of her own bed? Naomi stood back, observing. She watched how Layla's fever seemed to spike at certain times, how her delirium followed patterns. The child kept reaching for something, her hand grasping at air. Finally, her fingers closed around the tarnished silver music box on her nightstand, and something strange happened. Her breathing calmed slightly. The thrashing reduced. She wants the music box, Naomi said quietly. Yasmin, through her tears, seemed to notice Naomi for the first time. What? The music box. Look. When she holds it, she calms down. It was true. With the small silver object clutched to her chest, Layla's movements became less frantic. Her breathing, while still labored, found a rhythm. Khalid noticed too, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. That's been with her since she was a baby, Yasmin whispered. Her grandmother gave it to her. But it's just a music box, how could it? I don't know, ma'am, Naomi said. But maybe there's something about it that comforts her, something familiar. While the others focused on Layla, Naomi's eyes drifted to the heating vent she'd examined the night before. In the chaos, no one noticed as she knelt beside it, pretending to pick up a fallen towel. She pressed her face close to the vent again, breathing deeply. The chemical smell was still there, faint but present. And now in the morning light she could see something else. A fine dust around the edges of the vent, almost invisible against the white paint. She touched it with her fingertip and brought it close to her eyes. The dust had an odd, metallic sheen. Not normal household dust, something else. Naomi! Maria's voice snapped her back to attention. We need more ice. Yes, ma'am. Naomi rose quickly, but not before pocketing the towel she'd used to collect some of the dust. Her heart pounded as she left the room. What she needed was proof, something concrete to back up her suspicions. But how could she get it? In Kareem's room across the hall, the boy had woken during the commotion. He lay in bed, eyes alert despite his weakness, listening to his sister's cries. When Naomi passed his door, he called out to her. Is Layla dying? Naomi stopped, torn between comforting lies and honest truth. She entered the room and sat carefully on the edge of his bed. She's very sick, sweetheart, but everyone is trying their best to help her. The doctors can't fix us, Kareem said with the blunt wisdom of children. I heard Baba on the phone. He was crying. Your father loves you very much. Sometimes love means crying because you care so deeply. Kareem studied her with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. You're different from the other maids. You look at things. What do you mean? The others, they look at us like we're already ghosts. But you look at things around us. The vents, the walls, the furniture. He paused. His breathing labored. Do you know something? Naomi's throat tightened. This child, sick as he was, had noticed her observations. I'm trying to understand, honey, that's all. My compass, Kareem said suddenly, reaching for the brass instrument on his nightstand. Like his sister with her music box, he seemed calmed by holding it. Grandmother gave me this. She said it would always point me home. But lately, it acts strange. The needle spins and spins. When does it do that? At night, mostly. When the heating turns on. He looked at her with sudden intensity. That means something, doesn't it? Before Naomi could respond, Khalid appeared in the doorway. His eyes were red-rimmed, his composure hanging by a thread. "Kareem needs to rest, please." "Of course, sir." Naomi rose to leave, but Khalid's hand on her arm stopped her. "What were you talking about?" "Just trying to keep his spirits up, sir." Khalid's grip tightened slightly. "Last night, you asked about when the children got sick. Just now I saw you examining the heating vent in Layla's room. What are you looking for, Naomi?" The moment of truth had arrived sooner than she'd expected. Naomi took a breath, knowing her next words could change everything. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I think I might know what's making your children sick, but I need you to trust me, and I need you to not dismiss what I'm about to say just because I'm a maid." Khalid released her arm, his expression unreadable. "I'm listening." "Not here," Naomi said, glancing at Kareem. "And not now. Your daughter needs you. But tonight, after the children are settled, I need to show you something. Will you give me that chance?" For a long moment, Khalid simply stared at her. She could see the war in his eyes. Hope fighting skepticism. Desperation battling pride. A billionaire, accustomed to experts and specialists, being asked to trust a woman he'd known for less than 2 weeks. "If this is some kind of—" he began. "It's not," Naomi interrupted, her voice steady. "I don't want money, I don't want recognition. I want those children to live, that's all." Something in her tone must have convinced him. Khalid nodded once sharply. "Tonight, 10 o'clock, my study. If you're wasting my time—" "I'm not, sir. I promise you, I'm not." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension. Layla's fever finally broke around noon, leaving her weak but conscious. Yasmin barely left her side, holding her daughter's hand and whispering prayers in Arabic. Kareem drifted in and out of sleep, each time he woke seeming a little more distant, as if he were slowly slipping away from the world. Naomi worked through her usual duties, cleaning, serving meals, changing linens, but her mind was elsewhere. She needed evidence, something more substantial than a smell and a hunch. During her afternoon break, while the others napped in their quarters, she made her way to the storage room where household supplies were kept. She found what she was looking for in a corner cabinet, the log book where all maintenance and renovation work was recorded. It was a habit of wealthy households to document everything, and the Al-Rashid mansion was no exception. Naomi flipped through the pages until she found the entries from 2 months ago. Elite Renovations, Inc. Children's Wing Update. New paint, custom color, lavender pearl, furniture installation, bathroom remodel, HVAC vent cleaning and replacement. Duration, 3 weeks. Completed, April 15th. 3 days later, another entry. Children reporting headaches and fatigue. Mrs. Al-Rashid attributes to spring allergies. 1 week after that, both children collapsed during breakfast. Emergency services called. The timeline confirmed her suspicions, but it wasn't proof. She needed more. Naomi pulled out her phone, an old model, nothing fancy, and photographed the logbook entries. Then she searched for the renovation company's contact information. Elite Renovations, Inc. had an address in downtown Los Angeles. On impulse, Naomi dialed the number. A cheerful receptionist answered. "Elite Renovations, how may I direct your call?" "Hi, yes, I'm calling about a job you did about 2 months ago. The Al-Rashid residence in Beverly Hills." "1 moment, please." A pause, some typing. "Yes, I have that file. How can I help you?" "I'm with the household staff and we're having some concerns about the materials used, specifically the paint in the children's rooms. Can you tell me what product that was?" "I'm not authorized to release that information over the phone. You'd need to submit a written request." "This is somewhat urgent," Naomi pressed. "The children have been very ill and the doctors are trying to rule out environmental factors." The receptionist's tone shifted. "Ill? What kind of illness?" "Unexplained, severe. They've been hospitalized." Naomi let the weight of those words hang. Another pause, longer this time. "Look, I shouldn't be telling you this, but we had another call about that job. About 3 weeks ago. Someone else asking about the materials." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Who?" "I don't know. They didn't leave a name, but they asked specifically about the paint and whether we'd done any work on the ventilation system." The receptionist lowered her voice. "Between you and me, that paint was a special order, custom mixed by the client's designer. We just applied it. And the vents. We were told to clean them thoroughly, but the seals on some were old. We recommended replacement, but the client wanted to minimize costs." "Old seals," Naomi repeated. "What happens when seals are old?" "They can crack, let through air from other parts of the system, but look, I really can't say more. If there's a problem, you need to speak with our supervisor. Thank you. You've been very helpful." Naomi ended the call, her hands shaking slightly. Pieces were coming together. Custom paint, old vent seals, chemical smells, children getting sick immediately after renovation, but she still needed the crucial link. What exactly was making them ill? That evening, as the household settled into its anxious routine, Naomi made one more trip to the children's wing. This time, she brought a small flashlight and a screwdriver from the maintenance closet. In Layla's room, with the child sleeping peacefully and Nurse Chen momentarily away, Naomi approached the heating vent. She worked quickly, unscrewing the cover and shining her light into the ductwork. The metallic smell was stronger here, almost overwhelming. And there, lining the interior of the vent, she could see it. A fine coating of something that looked like dust, but had that same metallic sheen she'd noticed earlier. Using a clean tissue, she carefully collected a sample. Then she replaced the vent cover and left the room as silently as she'd entered. At exactly 10 o'clock, Naomi stood outside Khalid's study, her heart pounding. In her pocket was the tissue with the dust sample, her phone with photos of the logbook, and a theory that seemed both obvious and impossible. She raised her hand and knocked. "Come in." Khalid sat behind an enormous desk of dark wood, the city lights of Los Angeles spreading out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked like a king in his castle, powerful and untouchable, but his eyes betrayed him, red and exhausted, filled with a father's desperate hope. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Tell me what you think you know." Naomi remained standing. "Mr. Al-Rashid, before I begin, I need you to understand something. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. I'm a woman who's cleaned a lot of houses and seen a lot of things. What I'm about to tell you is based on observation and experience, not expertise, but I believe I'm right. And if I am, your children are running out of time." Khalid leaned forward. "Then stop stalling and tell me." Naomi pulled out the tissue and placed it on his desk. "This is dust from inside the heating vent in Layla's room. Look at it closely. Does it look normal to you?" Khalid studied the sample, frowning. "It's just dust." "It's not. Normal dust is gray, maybe brown. This has a metallic quality and it smells wrong." She pulled out her phone and showed him the photos of the logbook. "The renovation finished April 15th. 3 days later, your children started showing symptoms. The renovation company told me they recommended replacing the vent seals, but the client wanted to minimize costs. Old seals can crack, allow air to pass through from other parts of the system." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that something in that renovation, the paint, the sealant, something is poisoning your children, and it's being circulated through the ventilation system every time the heating or cooling turns on. They're breathing it in, day and night, in their own bedrooms." Khalid's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. The doctors tested for environmental toxins. Did they test the dust from inside the vents? Did they analyze the paint? Did they check what's actually in the air your children are breathing?" Silence filled the room, heavy and damning. Finally, Khalid spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "If you're right, if this is true, then I did this. I approved the renovation. I chose those rooms. You couldn't have known," Naomi said firmly. "But now you do. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Khalid looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the mansion, she saw him not as a distant employer, but as a desperate father willing to listen to anyone, even a maid, if it meant saving his children. "We?" he asked. "We," Naomi confirmed, "because I'm not done. But I'll need your help, and I'll need you to trust me even when what I ask seems crazy." Khalid stood, walking to the window. For a long moment he stared out at the city, his empire, his world, none of it meaning anything if his children died. Then he turned back to Naomi, and in his eyes was something she recognized, the willingness to do whatever it took. "Tell me what you need." The clock on Khalid's desk read 10:47 p.m. when Naomi finished outlining her plan. He'd listened without interruption, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally grim determination. "You want to move them," he said slowly, "in the middle of the night, to the guest house. Not just move them, completely isolate them from this building's ventilation system," Naomi corrected. "The guest house has its own HVAC, separate from the main mansion. If I'm right, if the source of the toxin is in this building's ductwork, removing them from exposure is the first step. And if you're wrong, if moving sick children in their condition causes more harm," Naomi met his gaze steadily, "then I'll take full responsibility. Fire me. Sue me if you want. But Mr. Al-Rashid, those children are dying anyway. In 3 weeks they've gone from healthy to barely conscious. How much worse can it get? Khalid flinched at her bluntness. The doctors said moving them could be dangerous. The stress. The doctors also said they had no answers. Naomi interrupted. Sir, I know this is hard. I know trusting me seems insane, but I've seen this before. Seen what before? Naomi hesitated, then decided truth was her only weapon. 20 years ago, I worked for a family in Atlanta. The grandfather lived with them, and he started getting sick. Confusion, tremors, weakness. Doctors couldn't figure it out. Then one day I was cleaning his bedroom and noticed the same thing I noticed here. A smell from the vents. A strange dust. Turned out the house had been renovated, and they'd used lead-based paint in one section. Old vent system spread contaminated dust throughout his wing. Lead poisoning, Khalid said, understanding dawning. You think my children have lead poisoning? I don't know if it's lead specifically. Could be any number of toxins, volatile organic compounds from paint, formaldehyde from new furniture, even arsenic from certain sealants. Old homes sometimes have these problems, but new renovations can create them too, especially if materials aren't properly tested or if ventilation systems are compromised. Khalid was already moving, pulling out his phone. I'm calling Dr. Whitfield back. We'll have them tested immediately for heavy metals, VOCs, everything. Tests take time, Naomi said urgently. Days, maybe weeks for comprehensive environmental screening. Do Layla and Kareem have that time? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. They both knew the answer. Layla's fever episodes were increasing in frequency and severity. Kareem had barely woken that afternoon, and when he didn't recognize his mother for several terrifying minutes. What exactly are you proposing? Khalid asked. We move them tonight, quietly, to the guest house. We seal off their old rooms and have environmental specialists analyze everything. The paint, the vents, the furniture, all of it. Meanwhile, we keep the children in a clean environment with fresh air and see if their condition improves. Naomi pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. I took the liberty of researching. There's a company called EnviroTest Solutions that does 24-hour emergency environmental assessments. They can be here by morning. Khalid stared at the paper, then at Naomi. You've thought this through. I had to, because I knew this conversation would be hard enough without a plan. A knock at the door interrupted them. Yasmin entered, her face drawn with exhaustion. She looked between her husband and the maid with confusion. Khalid, what's going on? Why is she here so late? Khalid exchanged a glance with Naomi, then gestured for his wife to sit. Yasmin, you need to hear this. 20 minutes later, Yasmin sat in stunned silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. The renovation, I chose everything. The paint colors, the furniture, Her hands trembled. I did this to them. No, Naomi said firmly. You wanted to give your children beautiful rooms. You trusted professionals to use safe materials. This isn't your fault. But Yasmin wasn't listening. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of guilt crashed over her. Khalid moved to comfort her, wrapping his arms around his wife as she sobbed. Naomi stood quietly, giving them space. She understood their pain was beyond anything she could address, but they were running out of time for grief. Mrs. Al-Rashid, she said gently, your children need you strong right now. We can assign blame later. Right now, we need to act. Yasmin looked up, her eyes red but fierce. What do we need to do? By midnight, a strange procession moved through the mansion's grounds. Khalid carried Kareem, the boy's frail body wrapped in clean blankets. Naomi supported Yasmin, who held Layla, her daughter's head resting against her shoulder. Nurse Chen followed with medical equipment, her professional skepticism overridden by the parents' determination. The guest house sat 50 yards from the main mansion, connected by a stone path through manicured gardens. It was smaller but luxurious. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, living area. Most importantly, it had been unoccupied during the renovation, its systems completely separate from the main house. They'd opened every window before bringing the children in, letting the cool night air flush through the space. Maria had prepared fresh linens, washed 3 times to remove any potential residue. Every surface had been wiped down with plain water and vinegar. No chemicals, no fragrances. As they settled the children into beds, Naomi watched anxiously. This was the gamble. If she was wrong, she'd torn 2 critically ill children from their established medical setup based on nothing but intuition. If she was right, their rooms in the main house, Naomi said to Khalid. "We need to seal them completely. No one goes in or out until the environmental team arrives." "I'll have maintenance tape off the entire wing," Khalid agreed. He looked at his children, so small and fragile in their new beds. "How long before we know if this is working? If it's acute toxin exposure, we might see improvement within hours. If it's accumulated poisoning, it could take days." Naomi paused. "But there's something else we need to do." "What?" "Their personal items, the music box and the compass." Naomi had noticed both children had been moved without these objects. "They need them." Khalid frowned. "They're just toys. Sentimental value, but..." "Exactly. Sentimental value. Comfort. When everything else is strange and scary, those objects are familiar." Layla calms down when she holds her music box. Kareem's compass grounds him. Naomi met his eyes. Sometimes healing isn't just physical. It's emotional too. Yasmin overheard and nodded immediately. "I'll get them." "Wait," Naomi said. "Let me go. Those items have been in the contaminated rooms. They need to be cleaned thoroughly first." She made the trip back to the main house alone, climbing the stairs to the sealed-off wing. The yellow caution tape across the entrance felt ominous. She ducked under it, moving quickly to Layla's room first. The music box sat on the nightstand where the child had left it. Naomi picked it up carefully, examining it in the moonlight streaming through the window. It was old, clearly an antique, its silver tarnished with age. She wound the key, and a delicate melody played, something Middle Eastern, hauntingly beautiful. In Kareem's room, she found the brass compass. She opened it, watching the needle spin erratically, just as the boy had described. But that made no sense unless... Naomi looked up at the heating vent above the bed, then back at the compass. The needle was reacting to something, some kind of electromagnetic interference, or metallic particles in the air. She quickly grabbed both items and left the wing, her heart pounding. In the kitchen, she scrubbed them thoroughly with soap and water, dried them carefully, then wrapped them in clean towels. By the time she returned to the guest house, it was nearly 2 a.m. Layla was awake, crying softly. But when Yasmin placed the clean music box in her hands, the child's sobs quieted. She clutched it to her chest, and for the first time in days, a small smile touched her lips. Kareem was asleep, but Naomi placed the compass on his nightstand where he'd see it when he woke. The boy's breathing seemed easier already, though she knew that might be wishful thinking. "Now we wait," Khalid said, standing at the window, looking back at the dark mansion. Naomi joined him. "Now we wait." As dawn approached, they took turns watching the children. Naomi insisted the others try to rest, but she remained vigilant, monitoring every breath, every movement. She'd staked everything on this theory: her job, her reputation, possibly even these children's lives. At 6 a.m., something changed. Naomi was dozing in a chair when Nurse Chen's excited voice woke her. "Her fever. It's dropping." Everyone rushed to Layla's bedside. The nurse was right. The thermometer read 101. 2 down from 103, 5 hours earlier. It wasn't normal yet, but the trajectory had reversed. "It could be coincidence," Khalid said, but hope cracked his voice. "The medication finally working, or the clean air," Yasmin whispered, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, Naomi was right. An hour later, Kareem woke up. His eyes were clear, focused. When he saw his parents, he smiled. A real smile. Not the confused, distant expression they'd grown accustomed to. "Mama," he said. "Where are we?" Yasmin broke down completely, gathering her son into her arms. Khalid stood frozen, as if afraid to believe what he was seeing. Naomi stepped back, letting the family have their moment. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. She'd been right. Against all odds, against everyone's skepticism, she'd been right. But the battle wasn't over. The children were improving, yes, but they weren't healed. The source of the toxin still needed to be identified and eliminated, and there were questions that needed answers. How had this happened? Who was responsible? At 8 a.m., the environmental testing team arrived. Khalid had called them at 3 a.m., offering triple their normal rate for immediate service. They descended on the mansion like a specialized surgical team, armed with air quality monitors, material samplers, and detection equipment Naomi couldn't begin to understand. She stood with the family on the guest house terrace, watching the activity. The children were sleeping peacefully now, their vital signs steadily improving. It felt like watching a miracle unfold in real time. "I owe you an apology," Khalid said quietly, not looking at Naomi. "And more than that, I owe you my children's lives." "You don't owe me anything, sir. I just did what needed to be done." "No," He turned to face her and his eyes were wet. You did what no one else could do. 7 specialists and none of them saw what you saw. None of them thought to look at something as simple as... His voice broke. Yasmin took Naomi's hand, squeezing it tightly. No words were necessary. By noon, the environmental team had their preliminary results. The lead investigator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, gathered everyone in the guest house living room. Her expression was grave. Mr. and Mrs. Al-Rashid, she began, I need to inform you that your instincts were correct. We've identified dangerous levels of several toxins in the children's wing of the main house. Dr. Morrison opened her tablet, displaying a graph with red lines spiking far above safe threshold markers. We found elevated levels of volatile organic compounds, specifically formaldehyde and benzene, in the air samples from both children's bedrooms. But the primary concern is this. She swiped to another screen showing microscopic imagery. The custom paint used in the renovation contains a pigment compound that, while legal in many countries, releases toxic fumes when exposed to heat. Your HVAC system was cycling warm air through cracked vent seals, essentially baking the paint and dispersing the fumes directly into the children's breathing space. Khalid's face went white. How much exposure are we talking about? Based on the concentration levels and the timeline you provided, your children were breathing these compounds approximately 16 hours per day for 6 weeks. Dr. Morrison's voice was clinical, but not unkind. The symptoms you described, neurological decline, fever, muscle weakness, are consistent with acute chemical poisoning. If they'd remained in those rooms another week, she didn't need to finish. Yasmin made a sound like a wounded animal. Khalid pulled her close, but his eyes were fixed on Naomi with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with horror at how close they'd come to losing everything. The good news, Dr. Morrison continued, is that you removed them from exposure in time. With clean air, proper hydration, and possibly chelation therapy to help clear their systems, they should make a full recovery. It will take weeks, maybe months, but the prognosis is excellent. And the house? Khalid asked. The entire children's wing needs to be gutted. Paint stripped, furniture disposed of, ductwork replaced. We're talking extensive remediation. She pulled up a document. I'm recommending you contact your legal team regarding the renovation company. This level of contamination suggests either negligence or deliberate use of substandard materials. After Dr. Morrison left to continue her assessment, the room fell into heavy silence. Through the window, Naomi could see workers in hazmat suits entering the main house. It looked like a crime scene, which in a way, it was. I want to know who did this, Khalid said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Who at Elite Renovations approved these materials? Who ignored the safety protocols? Sir, Naomi interjected carefully, there's something Dr. Morrison said that bothers me. She mentioned the paint was legal in many countries. Which countries was it not legal in? Khalid pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. His expression darkened as he read. The compound she mentioned, it's banned in the European Union and Canada, still permitted in the US but heavily regulated. There are supposed to be ventilation requirements, curing time before occupancy, warnings. He looked up, none of which we received. So someone cut corners, Yasmin said bitterly. Someone decided our children's safety was less important than, what? Saving money? Meeting a deadline? Naomi thought back to her phone call with the Elite Renovations receptionist. There was something else. The receptionist mentioned someone else called about the job 3 weeks ago, asking about materials. Someone who didn't leave a name. 3 weeks ago, Khalid repeated. That would have been right after the children first went to the hospital. His eyes narrowed. Someone knew. Someone called to check on what materials were used because they suspected something. But who? Yasmin asked. And why didn't they tell us? Before anyone could answer, Nurse Chen appeared in the doorway with a strange expression. Mr. Al-Rashid, there's someone at the gate, a man named David Chen. My brother, actually. He says he needs to speak with you urgently. He's an environmental inspector with the county. The coincidence seemed too perfect. Khalid exchanged glances with Naomi, then nodded. Let him in. David Chen arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a worn briefcase and looking distinctly uncomfortable. He was in his 50s, with gray streaking his dark hair and the weary expression of a civil servant who'd seen too much bureaucratic failure. Mr. Al-Rashid, Mrs. Al-Rashid, he began, his voice formal. I apologize for the intrusion. My sister mentioned your children's situation and I couldn't stay silent any longer. You know something about the renovation, Khalid stated, rather than asked. David nodded. opening his briefcase with trembling hands. 3 months ago, I inspected Elite Renovations' warehouse as part of a routine check. I found serious violations, improperly stored chemicals, materials that should have been disposed of as hazardous waste, paint products that didn't match their safety labels. He pulled out a thick folder. I filed a report, recommended they be shut down pending investigation. And Khalid's voice was dangerous. And nothing. My report was delayed. Lost in the system, they said. Elite Renovations has connections at City Hall, campaign donors to the right people. David's face flushed with shame. I pushed back, but I'm one inspector in an underfunded department. I was told to focus on other cases. So you did nothing, Yasmin said coldly. I did what I could within the system, David protested weakly. But when my sister told me about your children, told me it was Elite Renovations who did your renovation, he looked genuinely sick. I started asking questions, called the company anonymously to confirm what materials they'd used. That's when I knew. Knew what? Khalid demanded. That your children were being poisoned by products I'd specifically flagged as dangerous. Products that should never have been used in a residential space, especially not a children's room. David's hands shook as he handed over the folder. This is everything. My original inspection report, photos of the materials, documentation of the cover-up. It's all here. Naomi watched as Khalid flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each one. Photos showed barrels of paint labeled as low VOC, but with different product codes underneath, codes that David had annotated as high-toxicity industrial grade. Emails showed city officials dismissing his concerns, suggesting he was overreacting and hurting local businesses. They knew, Khalid said, his voice barely controlled. The company knew these products were dangerous. The city inspectors knew there were problems, and they used them anyway in my children's rooms. I'm so sorry, David whispered. If I'd pushed harder, if I'd gone to the media, or... You're here now, Naomi interrupted, her tone gentle. That takes courage. You're risking your career by bringing this forward. My career? David laughed bitterly. My sister told me about a maid who saved your children's lives by trusting her instincts over 7 specialists' opinions. If she can be that brave, the least I can do is tell the truth. Consequences be damned. Khalid stood abruptly, pacing to the window. When he turned back, his expression had transformed from grief to something harder, more focused. Here's what's going to happen. I'm calling my attorney, the best in California. We're going to take everything in this folder, everything Dr. Morrison's team finds, and we're going to burn Elite Renovations to the ground. And every city official who helped cover this up is going down with them. Khalid, Yasmin began. No. His voice was final. They almost killed our children. They're probably poisoning other families right now with the same materials. This ends today. From the bedroom, they heard a small voice call out, "Baba?" Everyone froze. Then Yasmin rushed to the doorway. Layla was sitting up in bed, her eyes clear and focused. "Mama, I'm thirsty." It was such a simple, normal request, a child asking for water, but Yasmin burst into tears. Naomi quickly poured a glass and brought it over, helping the little girl drink. "Where are we, Layla asked, looking around the unfamiliar room. "This isn't my bedroom. We're in the guest house, Habibi," Yasmin said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "You've been sick, but you're getting better now." "I had bad dreams," Layla said softly, "about my room. It felt like the walls were breathing bad air." She looked at Naomi with those unnervingly perceptive eyes children sometimes have. "You moved us, didn't you? You knew something was wrong." Naomi knelt beside the bed. "I had a feeling, sweetheart, and your parents were brave enough to listen." In the other bedroom, Kareem was also waking up, though. Within an hour, both children were sitting up, eating small amounts of food, asking questions. Their recovery wasn't complete. They were still weak, still needed monitoring, but the difference from 24 hours ago was miraculous. Dr. Morrison returned that evening with her full report. The contamination was even worse than initially suspected. The furniture had been treated with flame retardants that released toxic fumes. The bathroom fixtures had sealants containing dangerous levels of lead. The beautiful, custom-designed rooms Yasmin had created with love had been death traps. "One more week," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "Maybe less." The exposure was reaching critical mass. Khalid looked at Naomi, standing quietly in the corner as always, and something shifted in his expression. "You saved them. A maid who'd been here 2 weeks saw what 7 specialists missed." "I just paid attention," Naomi said simply. "No, Khalid shook his head. You did more than that. The story broke 3 days later. Beverly Hills billionaire's children poisoned by luxury renovation screamed the headline in the Los Angeles Times. By noon, every major news outlet had picked it up. Camera crews lined the street outside the mansion's gates. Reporters shouted questions at anyone entering or leaving. Inside the guest house, the al-Rashid family tried to maintain normalcy, while their world exploded into public view. Layla and Kareem were improving daily, eating full meals, laughing at cartoons, asking when they could go back to school. Their blood tests showed toxin levels dropping steadily. Dr. Morrison had been right. They would make a full recovery. But the main house remained sealed, a monument to negligence and greed. Khalid's attorneys had descended like sharks, filing lawsuits against elite renovations, 3 city officials, and the paint manufacturer. Criminal charges were being pursued. The scandal had already cost 2 inspectors their jobs and prompted a citywide review of building safety protocols. Naomi watched it all from the margins, uncomfortable with the attention. Several reporters had tracked down her identity and camped outside the staff entrance, shouting questions about the heroic Maid who saved the billionaire's children. She refused all interviews, slipping in and out of the property through the service gate that only staff knew about. You should talk to them, Maria urged over breakfast. Tell your story. You're a hero. I'm not a hero, Naomi said firmly. I just did what anyone should have done. But no one else did, Thomas pointed out. 7 fancy doctors, and you're the one who figured it out. Naomi shook her head. The doctors were looking at the children. I was looking at the environment. Different perspectives, that's all. But it wasn't that simple, and she knew it. There had been a moment when she could have stayed quiet, could have told herself it wasn't her place to question. A moment when speaking up could have cost her everything. She'd chosen courage over safety, and it had made all the difference. That afternoon, Khalid summoned her to the guest house. She found him in the living room with Yasmin, both dressed more casually than she'd ever seen them. Layla and Kareem were napping, their healthy color returning day by day. Sit, please, Khalid said, gesturing to a chair. Naomi sat, uncomfortable with the formal tone. Is everything all right? More than all right, Yasmin said, her eyes warm. Our children are alive because of you. We've been discussing how to properly thank you. That's not necessary. It absolutely is, Khalid interrupted. We've set up a trust fund in your name. Enough to ensure you never have to worry about money again, enough to… No. Naomi's voice was quiet but firm. Thank you, but no. Stunned silence filled the room. Yasmin recovered first. Naomi, you don't understand. We're talking about financial security for life. You could retire, buy a home, anything you want. I understand completely, Naomi said, and I'm grateful for the thought, but I didn't do this for money. I did it because 2 children were dying and I thought I could help. She met their eyes steadily. If you pay me, it changes what happened. It makes it a transaction instead of just doing what's right. Khalid leaned back, studying her with new respect. You're an unusual woman, Naomi Washington. I'm really not. I'm just someone who's learned that sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. And that's speaking up. Even when you're scared, even when no one wants to listen, that matters. Then at least let us do something, Yasmin pleaded. There must be something you want, something we can do to show our gratitude. Naomi hesitated, then spoke carefully. There is one thing, but it's not for me. Name it. David Chen, the inspector who brought you the evidence. Naomi's expression was serious. He lost his job yesterday. Whistleblower retaliation, they're calling it. He did the right thing and now he's paying the price. If you want to help someone, help him. Khalid nodded slowly. Already done. My attorneys are representing him pro bono in his wrongful termination suit. And I've made some calls. He'll have a new position with a private environmental firm by the end of the month with a significant raise. And his sister? Naomi pressed. Nurse Chen. She's been working 20-hour days taking care of your children. A year's salary as a bonus, Yasmin said. Plus a month of paid vacation, which we're insisting she take. Naomi smiled. Then you've already done what needed to be done. But what about you? Khalid asked, frustrated. You saved our children's lives. There has to be something. Let me keep working here, Naomi said simply. Let me do my job. That's all I want. But even as she said it, she knew things had changed irreversibly. The other staff members looked at her differently now, with respect instead of casual acceptance. The al-Rashids treated her less like an employee and more like family, and the media attention showed no signs of fading. 2 days later, the situation came to a head. Naomi was cleaning the guest house kitchen when she heard raised voices outside. She looked through the window to see a reporter who'd somehow gotten past security, camera crew in tow cornering Khalid near the pool. "Mr. Al-Rashid, is it true the maid noticed something 7 specialists missed? What does that say about the medical establishment? Is she here now? Can we speak with her?" Khalid's security team was already moving in, but the damage was done. More reporters appeared, sensing blood in the water. The peaceful recovery space they'd created was being invaded. Naomi made a decision. She walked outside, past the security guards, and stood in front of the cameras. "You want to talk to me? Fine. I'll give you one statement, and then you leave this family alone. Deal?" The reporters surged forward, microphones thrust toward her face. "What made you suspect the renovation? How did you know when the doctors didn't? Are you some kind of medical expert?" "I'm not an expert in anything," Naomi said clearly. "I'm a maid. I clean houses, but I pay attention to details, and I've learned that sometimes the answer isn't complicated. The children got sick right after their rooms were renovated. That's not coincidence, that's cause and effect. Anyone could have seen it if they'd looked at the timeline instead of just the symptoms. But the doctors did their jobs," Naomi interrupted. "They ran tests, looked for diseases, tried treatments. They were focused on what was wrong inside the children. I was focused on what was wrong around them. We needed both perspectives, but no one thought to combine them until it was almost too late." "So, you're saying the medical establishment failed?" "I'm saying we all fail when we forget to look at the simple things. When we assume expensive equals safe, or that new means better, or that someone else has already checked the basics." Naomi's voice strengthened. "This family trusted professionals to create safe spaces for their children. Those professionals failed them. But worse, when things went wrong, everyone kept looking in complicated places for complicated answers. Sometimes the truth is right in front of us. We just have to be willing to see it." "What's your message to other families?" Naomi thought carefully before answering. "Trust your instincts, ask questions. Don't assume that because someone has credentials or charges a lot of money, they're infallible. And if something feels wrong, if your child's illness coincides with a renovation, or a new product, or a change in environment, speak up. Demand answers. Because you know your family better than any expert ever will." She turned away from the cameras, walking back toward the guest house. Behind her, reporters shouted more questions, but she ignored them. She'd said what needed to be said. Inside, she found the entire Al-Rashid family watching through the window. Layla and Kareem were sitting up on the couch, looking stronger than they had in weeks. Yasmin was crying silently. Khalid's expression was unreadable. "I'm sorry," Naomi said. "I should have asked permission before speaking to them, but they weren't going to leave until—" "Thank you," Khalid interrupted. "You just told the truth better than any of my PR people could have. No spin, no agenda, just truth." Kareem slipped off the couch and walked over to Naomi, moving slowly but steadily. He wrapped his thin arms around her waist. "You saved us," he said simply. "When everyone else gave up, you didn't." Naomi knelt down, looking into his eyes. "Your parents saved you by listening when they could have dismissed me. Your doctors saved you by running the tests that showed you were improving. Nurse Chen saved you by keeping you stable through the worst of it. I just noticed something. That's all." "That's everything," Layla said from the couch, clutching her cleaned music box. "Noticing is everything." That evening, as the sun set over Beverly Hills, Naomi stood on the guest house terrace. The main mansion loomed in the distance, still surrounded by hazmat workers and remediation crews. It would be months before the family could return to it, and even then, Yasmin had already told her they were considering selling it. Too many bad memories in those walls. But here, in this smaller space, life was returning to normal. Children laughing, parents smiling, a family healing together. Khalid joined her on the terrace, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He offered her one, and they stood in companionable silence watching the lights of the city begin to twinkle. "The lawsuit is moving forward," he said eventually. "My attorneys are confident. Elite renovations will be shut down and the individuals responsible will face criminal charges. The city is already implementing new safety protocols." "Good," Naomi said simply. "Because of you, other families won't go through what we did." Khalid paused. "That matters. More than you know." "I hope so." They stood quietly for another moment before Khalid spoke again. "You're still refusing the money." "I am." "Stubborn woman." "Yes, sir." He laughed softly. "My children adore you. Yasmin thinks of you as family. And I—" He trailed off, searching for words. I've learned something from you. About humility, about listening, about how wisdom doesn't always come with credentials." Naomi didn't respond, letting him work through his thoughts. "There's a board meeting next week," Khalid continued. "For my charitable foundation. We fund medical research, educational programs, that sort of thing. I want you there." "Sir, I'm not asking you to present or speak. I just want you in the room. Because I've realized that we make better decisions when we include perspectives from people who actually live in the real world, not just people who theorize about it from ivory towers." Naomi considered this. One meeting, as an observer. Deal. As they returned inside, where Yasmin was reading to the children, Naomi felt something shift. This family had come within days of losing everything. They'd been brought to their knees by forces beyond their control, but they'd survived. And in surviving, they'd all been changed. 6 weeks later, the transformation was complete. Not of the mansion, which remained under renovation, but of the people within it. The Al-Rashid family had moved into a temporary residence in Bel Air, a comfortable home without the oppressive grandeur of their previous dwelling. Here, in rooms that felt more like a home than a showcase, Layla and Kareem had fully recovered. The children were back in school now, their medical records showing no permanent damage from their ordeal. The toxins had been flushed from their systems, their cognitive functions restored, their strength returned. They were, by all medical accounts, miracle cases. Children who'd come within days of irreversible harm but emerged whole. Naomi had stayed with the family through the transition, though her role had evolved beyond traditional domestic work. She still cleaned and organized, still maintained the rhythms of household management, but now she also sat in on meetings with the children's doctors, offering observations that medical professionals had learned to value. She attended safety inspections of the new house, her eye for environmental details now recognized as invaluable. The legal battles were progressing with devastating efficiency. Elite Renovations had filed for bankruptcy within 2 weeks of the story breaking, but Khalid's attorneys had pierced the corporate veil, going after the individual owners and executives. 3 company officers faced criminal charges for negligent endangerment. The paint manufacturer had already settled out of court for an undisclosed sum that insiders whispered was in the tens of millions. But Khalid wasn't satisfied with financial compensation. He'd transformed his family's nightmare into a crusade for systemic change. On a crisp October morning, Naomi found herself in an unexpected place, a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. She sat in the gallery, watching as Khalid testified before a House committee on residential building safety regulations. "Members of the committee," Khalid began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through suffering, "I come before you not as a businessman or a billionaire, but as a father who nearly lost his children to a system that valued profit over safety. My family had resources that most Americans don't: access to the best doctors, the ability to hire environmental specialists, the means to fight back legally, and we still almost lost everything. What about families who can't afford 7 specialists, who can't hire private testing companies, who have no choice but to trust that the systems meant to protect them actually work?" He detailed the failures, how dangerous materials had been misrepresented, how safety inspections had been compromised by political influence, how families had no way to verify that renovations were done with safe products. His testimony was powerful, but it was the next part that made headlines. "I'd like to introduce someone," Khalid said, gesturing to the gallery. "Naomi Washington, would you please come forward?" Naomi's heart seized. They hadn't discussed this. She'd agreed to attend as a supporter, nothing more. But every eye in the room had turned to her, and Khalid's expression was both apologetic and determined. Slowly, she made her way to the witness table. A microphone was adjusted in front of her. Congressional representatives leaned forward with interest. Cameras focused on her face. "Ms. Washington," the committee chair said kindly, "we understand you were instrumental in identifying the source of the Al-Rashid children's illness. Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened?" Naomi's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I'm not a scientist or a doctor, I'm a domestic worker. I've cleaned houses for 26 years, and in that time I've learned to notice things. Smells that don't belong, patterns that repeat, changes in environment that coincide with changes in health. When I started working for the Al-Rashid family, their children were dying and no one could explain why. So I did what I always do. I paid attention." She described the timeline, the observations, the smell from the vents. She explained how she'd researched, made connections, built a theory, and then she said something that made the room go quiet. The thing that scares me most isn't what happened to the Al-Rashid children. They survived because their parents had resources to act quickly once we knew the problem. What scares me is thinking about all the families where no one is paying attention, where children get sick, and parents are told it's just asthma or allergies or bad luck, where people can't afford environmental testing or legal representation, where the system fails them, and they have no recourse. A representative from California spoke up. Ms. Washington, you're saying you believe this is a widespread problem? I'm saying that if it happened in a mansion in Beverly Hills with a family that could afford the best of everything, what's happening in regular neighborhoods? In low-income housing? In communities where people's complaints are ignored because they don't have power or money? Naomi leaned forward. After this story broke, I received letters, hundreds of them, families describing similar situations, children getting sick after renovations, mysterious illnesses that doctors can't explain, symptoms that everyone dismisses as coincidence. Some of them sent me photos of their homes, and I could see the same warning signs I saw in the Al-Rashid mansion. But these families can't afford $50,000 environmental assessments. They can't hire attorneys. They're trapped. The committee chair exchanged glances with her colleagues. What would you recommend we do? Naomi hadn't prepared for this question, but the answer came from her heart. Make environmental testing accessible and affordable for everyone. Require renovations to include post-completion safety certifications that are verified by independent inspectors, not ones paid by the renovation companies. Create a database where families can report suspicious illnesses, so patterns can be identified before more children get hurt. And most importantly, stop treating this as a problem that only affects wealthy families. The Al-Rashid children survived. How many others haven't? The room erupted in discussion. Several representatives began proposing legislation on the spot. Media members rushed to file stories. And Naomi sat there stunned by what she'd just done. A maid from Georgia, speaking truth to power in the halls of Congress. Afterward, in a quiet anteroom, Khalid found her sitting alone, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I should have warned you, but I knew if I asked you'd refuse and your voice needed to be heard. You ambushed me, Naomi said, but there was no anger in her tone. I did, and I'd do it again. Khalid sat beside her. Those letters you mentioned, the hundreds of families reaching out. You didn't tell me about those. I didn't want to burden you. You've been dealing with enough. Burden me? Khalid shook his head. Naomi, don't you see? This is bigger than my family now. This is about every family, and you're the voice that can reach them because you're one of them. Not a billionaire or a politician or a scientist. Just someone who paid attention and spoke up. Naomi looked at him, seeing the transformation in the man who'd once been too proud to listen to a maid's concerns. What are you asking me? Help me start a foundation. Not a typical charity that throws money at problems, but something real. A network of trained inspectors who can identify environmental hazards in homes. A fund to help families afford testing and remediation. An advocacy group to push for stronger regulations. He met her eyes. I have the resources. You have the knowledge and the credibility. Together, we could actually change things. I'm not qualified to run a foundation. You're more qualified than anyone I know. You saved my children when experts failed. You spoke truth when everyone else was afraid to. You've already changed my life. Let's change others' lives too. Naomi was silent for a long moment, weighing the enormity of what he was proposing. She thought about those letters from desperate families. She thought about children suffering because no one was paying attention to the simple things. She thought about the life she'd built, invisible, quiet, safe, and realized it was time to step into the light. I have conditions, she said finally. Name them. We don't just help wealthy families. We prioritize communities that need it most. Low-income housing, underserved neighborhoods, places where people have been ignored for too long. Agreed. We hire people from those communities. Train them. Give them real jobs with real wages, not just charity. Absolutely. And we never make this about credit or publicity. It's not about me being a hero or you being a generous billionaire. It's about fixing a broken system. Khalid extended his hand. You have my word. They shook on it, and in that moment, something new was born. A partnership between a Saudi billionaire and a black maid from Georgia, united by shared purpose and mutual respect. 3 months later, the Healthy Homes Initiative officially launched. The press conference was held not in a luxury hotel, but in a community center in South Los Angeles, surrounded by families who'd been affected by environmental hazards in their homes. Naomi stood at the podium, no longer uncomfortable with the attention, speaking with the authority of someone who'd earned their platform through action rather than credentials. "Every child deserves to be safe in their own home," she said to the assembled crowd and cameras. "Not just children in Beverly Hills, but children in Compton, in Detroit, and rural Mississippi. Safety shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a right. And this initiative is committed to making that right a reality." The foundation had already trained 50 inspectors, funded environmental testing for 200 homes, and identified hazardous conditions in 30% of those residences. They'd helped families access remediation services, connected them with legal resources when negligence was involved, and begun building a database of environmental health patterns. But more than the numbers, it was the stories that mattered. The single mother in Oakland whose daughter's mysterious seizures stopped after they identified mold in the walls. The family in Phoenix, whose twin boys recovered from respiratory illness once toxic insulation was removed. The elderly couple in Atlanta whose cognitive decline reversed after lead pipes were replaced. Each story was a victory. Each family saved was validation of the simple truth Naomi had always known. Paying attention matters. Speaking up matters. Refusing to accept, "That's just how things are," matters. In the audience, Yasmin sat with Layla and Kareem, both children healthy and vibrant. They'd insisted on attending, wanting to support the woman who'd saved their lives. Layla clutched her silver music box, cleaned and restored, now a reminder of survival rather than suffering. Kareem wore his brass compass on a chain around his neck, a symbol of finding direction when everything seemed lost. After the press conference, as people mingled and shared stories, Naomi found a quiet moment with the family. "Look at you," Yasmin said, embracing her warmly. "From our maid to congressional testimony to foundation director, you're changing the world." "I'm still your maid," Naomi said with a smile. "The foundation work is important, but so is making sure your home is clean and your family is cared for." "You're so much more than that," Khalid said. "Your family. You saved our children, yes, but you also saved us. Saved me from my own arrogance. Saved Yasmin from her guilt. Saved all of us from thinking that money and power were the only things that mattered." Layla tugged on Naomi's sleeve. "Miss Naomi, I told my class about you, about how you notice things that doctors didn't notice. My teacher said you're a hero." Naomi knelt down to the girl's level. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who learned to trust my instincts and speak up when something seemed wrong. That's something anyone can do. But most people don't," Kareem added, his voice wise beyond his 8 years. "Most people stay quiet because they're scared, or they think no one will listen. You didn't stay quiet. That's what makes you special." As the sun set over Los Angeles, casting golden light through the community center windows, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a new employee in a household of strangers, invisible and expendable. Now she was part of something larger than herself, a movement to protect the vulnerable, to hold the powerful accountable, to ensure that tragedy sparked change rather than just sympathy. The Al-Rashid case had made headlines, but it was the work that followed that would define her legacy. Every home inspected, every family helped, every child saved from unnecessary suffering. That was the real story. Not the dramatic rescue of billionaires' children, but the quiet, persistent work of making the world safer one house at a time. David Chen approached, his new position as the foundation's chief environmental officer suiting him well. Gone was the defeated civil servant. In his place was a man energized by purpose. The team in Detroit found elevated lead levels in 30 homes in one neighborhood, he reported. All built by the same contractor, all using the same substandard materials. "We're coordinating with local authorities and health departments. This could be big. Then we make sure those families get help," Naomi said firmly. "All of them. No one left behind. On it." David paused, then added, "Thank you for giving me a chance to do this right, for helping me find a way to use my knowledge for good instead of watching it get buried by bureaucracy. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up when it mattered most," Naomi replied. "Your evidence made all the difference." As people began to leave, promising to stay in touch and continue the work, Naomi stood alone for a moment in the emptying room. She thought about her grandmother, who'd raised her to be observant and questioning. She thought about all the families she'd worked for over 26 years, each one teaching her something about homes and health and the hidden dangers that could lurk in plain sight. She thought about the moment when she'd first smelled something wrong in Layla's room, the decision to investigate further, the risk of speaking up despite being dismissed, how easily she could have stayed silent, convinced herself it wasn't her place, let fear or deference keep her quiet, but she hadn't stayed silent. And 2 children were alive because of it. And now, dozens more families were being helped, hundreds more would be reached, thousands more might eventually benefit from the systems they were building. One person noticing, one person caring, one person refusing to accept that children should suffer when the answer was simple and preventable. That's all it had taken to start a revolution. Khalid appeared beside her, his presence no longer that of an employer but of a friend and partner. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how small actions can have big consequences," Naomi said softly. "About how easily this could have ended differently, if I'd ignored my instincts, if you'd refused to listen, if any number of small moments had gone another way." "But they didn't," Khalid said. "You trusted yourself. I learned to listen, and together we're making sure other families don't have to go through what mine did." He paused. "The contractors who built that Detroit neighborhood, they also did work in 3 other cities. The Foundation's investigations are revealing a pattern of negligence across multiple states. Your instinct about this being bigger than one family was right." "It's always bigger than we think," Naomi replied. "Every injustice, every tragedy, every preventable harm, they're usually symptoms of larger systemic failures. We just have to be willing to look at the patterns instead of dismissing them as isolated incidents." As they walked out into the evening air, the sounds of the city surrounding them, Naomi felt a profound sense of purpose. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined 6 months ago. She'd gone from invisible to influential, from dismissed to respected, from silent observer to powerful advocate. But at her core, she was still the same person, someone who paid attention to details, who trusted her instincts, who believed that speaking truth was more important than maintaining comfort. Those qualities hadn't changed. They'd simply found a larger stage. The Al-Rashid family's car waited at the curb, and Naomi climbed in beside them, heading back to the temporary house that had become home for all of them. Layla fell asleep against her shoulder, the music box still clutched in her small hands. Kareem dozed on the other side, his compass catching the streetlights as they drove through the city. Yasmin reached across and squeezed Naomi's hand. No words were necessary. In that gesture was gratitude, love, and the recognition that some bonds transcend traditional categories of employer and employee, helper and helped. They were family now, forged through crisis and strengthened through shared purpose. As the car wound through the hills toward home, Naomi looked out at the city lights spreading endlessly below. Somewhere out there were families who didn't know they were living with danger, children breathing toxins, parents trusting systems that had failed them, communities ignored by those with power to help. But now, there was a network fighting for them, inspectors trained to notice what others missed, resources available to families who couldn't afford them, advocates pushing for change at every level of government and industry, a movement built on the simple principle that everyone deserved to be safe in their own home. It had started with one family, one crisis, one maid who refused to stay silent. But it wouldn't end there. This was just the beginning of something larger, something that would outlast all of them. Something that would save lives for generations to come. And as the car pulled into the driveway, as the family prepared for another peaceful evening in a home they'd verified was safe, Naomi smiled. She'd done the unthinkable, challenged authority, trusted her instincts over experts, spoken truth when silence would have been easier, and in doing so she discovered her true calling. Not just cleaning homes but protecting them, not just serving families but saving them, not just existing in the margins, but standing at the center of meaningful change. The mansion in Beverly Hills would eventually be restored, every toxin removed, every danger eliminated. The Al-Rashid family would decide whether to return to it or sell it and move on. But regardless of where they lived, they would remain connected to Naomi and to the mission they'd built together. Because some stories don't end with a rescue, they begin with one. And this story, of observation, courage, and the power of speaking up, was only just beginning to ripple out into the world, touching lives in ways none of them could fully imagine. One maid, 2 children, a system that failed and a movement that rose from its failures. That was the true story, not of a billionaire's tragedy, but of how tragedy, when met with courage and action, could become transformation. And somewhere, in neighborhoods across the country, Other Naomis were learning to trust their instincts. Other families were being saved. Other children were breathing clean air in safe homes. All because one woman did the unthinkable. She paid attention, she spoke up, and she refused to let anyone, no matter how powerful or credentialed, dismiss the truth she could see with her own eyes.